Luc Bouchard with Solvac Life Coaching Services. I've been a certified life skills coach for 22 years, and I specialize in men's issues and what keeps men safe and concepts of masculinity and macho behavior. Today is the 46th day of the 72-day challenge. We're in the 7th week, and our weekly theme is masculinity. Our daily focus is men in relationships, and the topic today is power over versus power with. Yesterday, I covered in my video the myth of masculinity, and in a lot of ways the concept around that was the fact that men give their power away to others because they're so concerned about what other people think, and that they are engaged in a lot of behaviors which are really not very safe in many ways, because they are basically trying to seek social approval from others. And I asked a question which I found to be interesting, is that if no one knows that men are engaging in masculine behaviors, will they still engage in those masculine behaviors? I'm not quite certain. Also, a few videos ago, I also talked about power and control, and how power and control is really about basically asserting yourself at the cost of others, because when you're controlling everything around you. And that's because you have no personal power. So what you need to do is control the situation, control others, step on people's boundaries, be in charge, do whatever, because you have little personal power. So you're making yourself feel better because you make yourself feel better by overt behaviors in a lot of ways. And I'm going to take those two ideas and go a bit further with them, and it's around the idea of power over versus power with. But before I can really talk about power over and power with, I need to really look at what's going on in the background before people engage in power over behaviors or power with behaviors, and that is the idea of feeling less than. And when we feel less than someone else, what that really means is that we feel like we're being laughed at, we're at a disadvantage, we're disempowered, people want to have information on us that they can hurt us with, or they can basically hurt us in some way. And generally, when we are in that state of feeling less than, the visual I like to use is that we're here and the other person's up here. And what we need to understand about feeling less than, or the disempowered state, is that it's natural and normal to not want to stay down here. The question is, what do you do to get out of the less than state, the disempowered state? And do we engage in what I call power over behaviors or power with behaviors? Power over behaviors are about stepping on people's boundaries, being disrespectful. It's a false sense of empowerment, and it really is it's posturing and it's power and control. And at the heart of it, with men specifically and male behavior, it's grandiosity. And grandiosity, which I've talked about in the past, is really about this fact is that you're like way up here. You're just like better than people, and you're just you're coming across as really superior and above people. Power with behaviors are about respecting people's boundaries, maintaining a good sense of self, not putting up with behaviors, but not putting up with behaviors in a way that is going to wipe other people out. And it's really about enhancing and improving relationships. Power over is not about enhancing and improving relationships. Power over is about basically asserting yourself so that you feel better about yourself. And what we need to understand when it comes to power over is that if you're feeling less than, and generally power over is about self-esteem issue, or feeling less than and having to engage in power over behaviors, is really about esteem issues and self-esteem. Because if you need to assert yourself over somebody else, that's because you're feeling really less than. Versus, I don't want to be treated this way, so I'm not going to put up with it. And you have a better and more healthy sense of self-esteem if you're basically maintaining yourself as opposed to wiping somebody out. And what will happen, and what we see in situations that I'm sure you've all witnessed, is when situations get really out of control, it's what's going on when they escalate very quickly. That is, someone is feeling less than, and they don't like that. It's a disempowered state, so they don't want to be disempowered, and instead of going to power with, they go to power over, and they wipe the other person out. And then that person doesn't like it and doesn't want to feel less than, so then they go, and then the other person reacts, and it gets out of control. And that's where we see verbal confrontations, physical fights, really a lot of extreme behaviors because people are escalating it very quickly, and no one is engaging in power with, or they're certainly not disengaging altogether. When I deal with power over versus power with in my practice, and I talk to people, I always bring it back to having people look at how they felt disempowered in a situation. And people talk to me on a regular basis about how they get into a situation where they overamp, and it's like gets out of control very quickly. And some people are just really baffled as to how that situation got so out of hand. So I really help people understand about their disempowerment of it. And we really see a lot of these kind of behaviors in long-standing relationships with family members or parents, where you have always, or friendships or work relationships, where you've always inherently felt less than, and you don't know how to empower yourself, and you're down here for so long, and then what you eventually do is you end up asserting yourself but wiping someone out in the process. And then it gets to be blown up, or it gets out of control. So I help people look at how they felt disempowered to begin with, and what they can do to basically, what they did to make themselves feel better, which is this false sense of empowerment, but how they can do it more effectively, and get them to really look at what they can do in the future. And really it's a lot about understanding self, being in touch with self, and being authentic to self. Because this really comes down to, if we're not authentic to self, how are we going to know how other people affect us if we don't know how we're affected? So my question for the audience members and people who are listening to this video is, how do you engage in maintaining your power and getting your power back when you felt disempowered? Because we get wiped out all the time. We feel disempowered on a daily basis through other people cutting us off, or treating us poorly and whatnot. And the other thing I want to mention is that there's also this thing I talk about people, is that if they've had something happen to them that is, let's say, this big, and they overreact this much, or even bigger about that, the question is, why are they overreacting that big? Why are they just getting that bent out of shape about something, when it would have been appropriate to respond this big to this situation? But they get really, it's out of context or incongruent for what happened. And that is often, what I'll help people look at is, how come they overamped and when they went too far? But how do you maintain your power and control issues? And how do you engage in power over or power with? And this is both to men and women, because it's not only men that engage in power over. Women do it all the time. They just do it differently. Men's need to assert themselves in power over, where they're really coming over top on someone, is more overt and much more obvious in a lot of ways. It's more in your face, and you kind of sense it, you kind of feel it when men are doing that. We do it in very interesting ways. Women, however, are more subtle, and they engage in, I suggest, more passive-aggressive behaviors when they're trying to get their power over needs met, and to not feel disempowered. And that's where we'll hear women talking about other women backstabbing, or being passive-aggressive and coming around the other way, where they'll go and complain to others and about someone, and not be as in your face about that. And that behavior is called triangulation. And men do that, but women do it, I think, a bit more. So ultimately what happens on this is that you're not actually enhancing relationships when you engage in power over. You're not strengthening relationships, you're wiping relationships out. And you're not bringing people closer to you, you're repelling them, pushing them away. And that's why it's a power and control issue, because when you basically engage in power over, you're just like taking out everyone, or just that person and putting them in their place. And no one likes to do that, so how do they react? Or do they react? Or do they go away and engage in passive-aggressive behavior where you don't even know you've pissed them off? And if we don't understand that we engage in this, and this is how we manage ourselves and makes ourselves feel better, then we're just kind of muddling through, and we're not strengthening relationships. We're pushing people away, because people don't want to deal with that kind of over-the-top stuff. Luc Bouchard with Solve Act Life Coaching Services. I've been a certified life skills coach for 22 years, and I specialize in men's issues, and I have a long history of basically engaging in power over. And that was a lot because of a chip on my shoulder and taking things far too personally. And on a good day, I engage in power with, and on not so good days, I engage in power over, and try not to stay there and try not to do that. But it's a coping mechanism, and the question is, how functional is it for you? You have a good day, and I'll be back for video 47 tomorrow. Take care.